This is the grave of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. He was the second son of Joseph and Rose Kennedy. He served in the Navy during World War II. He commanded PT boats in the Pacific. His vessel PT-109 got destroyed by a Japanese cruiser, and the crew did survive and they were able to get to a nearby island, and because of that, Kennedy was hailed as a war hero. He was then elected to the House of Representatives in 1947, and he served as a senator from Massachusetts from 1953 to 1960. He ran for president in 1960, winning by a thin margin against Richard Nixon.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
And will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin.
He was the youngest elected president at 43 years old, and brought a sense of youthfulness and hopefulness with him to the White House. But he was going into leadership in a country and world plagued by problems: the developing Cold War, civil rights, mass domestic and global poverty. But he came prepared with some ideas.
There can be no greater service to our country, and no source of pride more real than to be a member of the Peace Corps of the United States.
And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it.
That's what the Alliance for Progress means: to provide progress, revolutionary progress, through peaceful democratic means. I think it can be done. I think we've set out on an important journey.
In too many parts of the country, wrongs are inflicted on Negro citizens, and there are no remedies at law. Unless the Congress acts, their only remedy is the street.
That no free nation can retain any illusions about the nature of the threat, and that no free nation can remain indifferent to the steady erosion of freedom around the globe. We do not believe that war is unavoidable or that negotiations are inherently undesirable. We do believe that an end to the arms race is in the interests of all.
He challenged the nation to successfully land on the moon by the end of the decade, which was accomplished in 1969. Alan Shepard reached space in 1961, and in 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth.
George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
There was also the issue of civil rights. He mostly agreed with equality, but because of the politics and the power of segregationists in Congress, he weighed and did little. He was possibly planning to take more action in his second term. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act in his honor.
Revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all.
He also established the Peace Corps in 1961. Cold War, and growing aggression from the Soviet Union as well as Communist Cuba.
Also be ready to resist with force if force is used upon us.
Either alone would fail. Together they can serve the cause of freedom and peace.
Choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
The Bay of Pigs invasion was a disaster for the president. He was pressured into approving the operation of invading Cuba to assassinate Fidel Castro, which failed miserably. Then in 1962, intelligence found that the Soviet Union was constructing missile silos in Cuba, and through 10 tense days, the US and Soviet Union negotiated a peace, and the silos were removed, avoiding a nuclear war.
Acting therefore in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western
Kennedy also got the
Hemisphere,
Nuclear Test Ban Treaty passed in 1963, with the UK and Soviet Union on board.
strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment.
Also, the Berlin Wall began construction, and the president traveled to West Berlin to make his famous speech.
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Kennedy was simply well loved and respected by most Americans. Of course, he had two children, Caroline and John Jr. He was very witty and playful too. Jackie, who was very next to him, was a very intelligent woman. She had a great appreciation for history and the arts. She was famous for her televised White House tour in 1962. She also brought a lot of class to the position, and she's one of the most beloved First Ladies. But during her life, she had her share of tragedy and hardships as well.
What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave, or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind of peace that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Too many of us think it is impossible, but that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again.
On November 22nd, 1963, the President and the First Lady landed in Dallas, Texas. The ensuing event is one of the most tragic events in American history. As the motorcade passed through downtown Dallas, the president was gunned down by a sniper, getting hit in the head right next to Jackie. The event stunned and horrified the nation. The young president with so much promise and work to do was assassinated. The funeral over the next 3 days was one of the largest in American history, with an outpouring of grief. Jackie chose for him to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The Eternal Flame was also her idea. She based it off the one at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, as well as the concept from the book that inspired their favorite play, Camelot.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world.
The assassination of the president had a profound effect on his younger brother, Robert Francis Kennedy. Though he would meet the same fate as his brother less than 5 years later, he made the most of the tragedy to change the country for the better. Robert was born on November 20th, 1925. He served in the Naval Reserve during World War II. He first became well known because he was the assistant counsel to Senator McCarthy in the Senate Labor Rackets Committee, where he harshly challenged Jimmy Hoffa and corruption in the Teamsters Union.
There are many difficulties, that there has been misuse of union funds, misappropriation of union funds, that there have been gangsters and hoodlums that have taken over unions.
In 1960, he effectively ran his brother's victorious presidential campaign, and his brother nominated him as Attorney General. Despite the nepotism of that, Robert Kennedy has probably been one of the best attorney generals. He was the first to use the position to address civil rights justly. But the great compassionate leader we now know was a direct result of his brother's murder. He forever changed with that. And he probably wouldn't have supported all the good causes he did without it. At the 1964 Democratic National Convention, he received a 20-minute-long standing ovation before being able to give his speech.
President Kennedy's favorite quote was,
he ran for the New York Senate seat that year and won. This is from a speech in Q&A at Columbia University. He gave many great speeches and did lots of important work during those years, and he continued to learn and change. He began to oppose the Vietnam War and started going head-to-head over disagreements with President Lyndon Johnson. Many wanted him to run for president in 1968, but he originally wasn't planning on it. But with the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, meeting with Cesar Chavez, and much, much more, he announced he would run, somewhat late in March of 1968. With that, Lyndon Johnson declared he would not run again.
I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
Kennedy was in Indianapolis that night, and he gave, in my opinion, one of the best speeches ever in a majority black neighborhood in Indianapolis.
Between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. We can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And what dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world.
While riots broke out in many cities, Indianapolis stayed calm because of Robert Kennedy.
Thank you very much.
What has violence ever accomplished? What has it ever created?
The next day, he gave another one of his best speeches in Cleveland, Ohio, The Mindless Menace of Violence.
No wrongs have ever been righted by riots and civil disorders. A sniper is only a coward, not a hero. And an uncontrolled or uncontrollable mob is only the voice of madness, not the voice of the people. Among free men, said Abraham Lincoln, there can be no successful appeal from the ballot to the bullet. And those who take such appeal are sure to lose their case and pay the cost. Violence breeds violence, repression breeds retaliation, and only a cleansing of our whole society can remove this sickness from our souls. For there is another kind of violence, slower, but just as deadly destructive as the shot or the bomb in the night. This is the violence of institutions, indifference, inaction, and decay. This is the violence that afflicts the poor, that poisons relations between men because their skin has different colors. This is the slow destruction of a child by hunger, and schools without books, and homes without heat in the winter. This is the breaking of a man's spirit by denying him the chance to stand as a father and as a man amongst other men. But we can perhaps remember, if only for a time, that those who live with us are our brothers, and surely we can begin to work a little harder to bind up the wounds among us and to become in our hearts brothers and countrymen once again.
The campaign went on over the next 2 months, and it was very close between him and also anti-war Senator Eugene McCarthy. While the vote was very split between two similar candidates, Kennedy constantly went to see how the poor farm workers in California and how people lived in other impoverished areas like the West Coast and in black ghettos.
With other countries, but I think we have to recognize that countries are going to be far more independent of us than they have been in the past.
On June 5th, he won the California primary, essentially securing that he would be the Democratic candidate in the fall's presidential election. He gave a victory speech in the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. This was around midnight, and when he was done, he walked backstage into a kitchen pantry area where a man named Sirhan Sirhan shot him. Kennedy was shot in the head and shoulder and died about 25 hours later on June 6, 1968. This event truly changed history. I believe he would have gone on to be the president that year and would have been one of the most effective and progressive presidents the nation had ever seen. Robert Kennedy was nothing like most politicians today. He was intelligent, an empathetic moralist, with the drive to make the nation succeed and for all citizens to live happily and prosper. After a funeral in New York City, the funeral train went to Washington, D.C., where Robert Kennedy was laid to rest near his slain brother. It has now been over 50 years, but his legacy lives on and continues to inspire. For me, it was a true honor to visit his gravesite.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. Those of us who loved him and who take him to his rest today pray that what he was to us, and what he wished for others, will someday come to pass for all the world. As he said many times, in many parts of this nation, to those he touched and who sought to touch him, some men see things as they are and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not.
With 3 Kennedy brothers dead, only one remained, Edward Moore Kennedy, or how most people know him, Ted Kennedy. He was born on February 22, 1932, and would become one of the longest-serving senators in U.S. history. He was elected as Senator of Massachusetts in 1962 to fill his brother's seat, and served in that Senate seat until his death in 2009. Most people associate him with the Chippequiddick incident in 1969, in which he got in an automobile accident and killed Mary Jo Kopensky. After that, he did try to cover some things up. He did plead guilty to leaving the scene of the crime, and this ruined his presidential aspirations. He is known as a Lion of the Senate. He wrote over 300 pieces of legislation that were enacted into law during his tenure, many dealing with healthcare, civil rights, and social justice. He was the sponsor of the National Cancer Act, the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, Ryan White AIDS Care Act, CHIP, the Children's Health Program, and he tried many times to pass universal health care, in which he was unsuccessful. He passed away on August 25, 2009, and was buried here at Arlington National Cemetery, near his 2 slain brothers. And this is a memorial to Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., the oldest Kennedy brother, who most people forget about. He was a lieutenant in the Navy during World War II, and was killed in 1944 in a top-secret operation piloting a patrol bomber over the English Channel. Their father had his political aspirations on him, and with his death, those aspirations fell to the other brothers. So think of how different history would be had he lived. And those are the graves of the Kennedy brothers at Arlington. Thanks for watching.